Persona 1, the game where it all started for the Shin Megami Tensei spin-off, leading us to one of the most well-renowned and respected JRPGs of today. Despite its importance, many people have not actually played or beaten it, and this includes yours truly, so I decided to rectify that. Over the past month or so, I've chipped away at this amazing narrative, digesting everything I can, and there's actually a lot to love about it. The story, the music, the art direction, the atmosphere, even the gameplay in some ways I really loved. And it had a lot of cool mechanics that could work in a modern Persona title. But no game is perfect, of course, so there are some qualms I had with it. And in this video, I'd like to share how I felt about it all. Just to preface this, I am playing on the PSP remake, but I have some quality of life mods installed to up-res textures. I'll also keep this mostly spoiler-free to keep this video as accessible as possible. With all of this said, let's go ahead and get started. And if you end up enjoying the video, please consider dropping a like and a subscribe. It helps the channel out a lot, and I'd really appreciate it. Let's begin with what is by far the biggest strength this game has going for it, which is the narrative. Again, this will mainly be spoiler-free, but I gotta give a general idea of what's going on. The story begins in the school St. Hermelin High, and you, the protagonist, otherwise known as Nalia Toto as I will call him in this video, ends up wrapped up in a game called Persona, which is supposedly a game that will show you what your future holds. Shortly after playing this game, he alongside his classmates are given the power of Persona to defend their town from demons, which puts them on their new journey to uncover the mysteries of what's happening, and a journey of self-discovery. From this point onward, you have two main story routes you can embark on, those being the SEBEC route and the Snow Queen route, both of which being canon, which is kinda confusing, but hey, I don't make the rules. Now, the thing I think was the best about the fact that there are two different routes you can take is that it's actually worth going out of your way to see and experience them. The thing with modern Persona alternate ends is that they are so obviously the wrong thing to do that there's no incentive or desire to do them unless you're just curious. But with Persona 1, that's not the case. In fact, it's the opposite. Since both routes are canon, to experience the full story, you kinda have to do both endings. This might seem a bit daunting at first. I mean, Persona games are long as hell, right? Well, not really in this case. I believe I beat the SEBEC route in about 20 to 30 hours give or take, and the Snow Queen route is actually shorter, so at most it'll come out to about the same time it takes to beat a modern game in the series. But realistically, it's going to be shorter. But that's cool with me because it's a nice breath of fresh air because these games are so long. Another thing I loved about the story is that besides the actual choices you make to advance toward a good or bad ending, there are also other choices that test your conviction as well. Since the theme of the game is to be and find your true self, I mean the PS1 version essentially says just that, you're given choices throughout the game that ultimately determine whether you successfully accomplish this or not. And if you choose the correct options, it will allow you to fuse the ultimate persona for each respective party member. If not, then well, you fucked up. I believe this is something that 1000% should and could return as a plot device because it actually makes you feel like the choices you make matter. Because let's be honest, 99% of choices you make in modern Persona don't actually do much aside from giving you a funny moment or whatever. Unless it's for the ending or social link, it's an afterthought. And the fact this game didn't do that makes me wonder why the hell they never did it again for the newer games. Regarding the SEBEC route I mentioned earlier, it focuses mainly on the group called SEBEC and their involvement in the mystery, Maki's internal struggles and the party's attachment to her. And I think this narrative is absolutely incredible. I'm not sure if I've said this in a video before, but for the modern games, I tend to say Persona 4 is the quote-unquote most Persona game, because of how it tackles the themes of self-discovery and acceptance. And well, after playing Persona 1, I'm happy to say I can basically say the exact same thing about this game as well. As I was playing, I was immediately interested in her character just because of the way it's portrayed. It makes you curious and confused, which was the main driving force that pushed me to complete the game after all this time. For those who are newer fans to the series like me, the best way I can describe it is that it's like Persona 5 Royal's third semester or Persona 5 Tactica's narrative. And considering those are some of the absolute best written pieces of Persona content out there at the moment in my opinion, that is very high praise coming from me. Her character arc and how she interacts with the rest of the cast is just so interesting, and she's the main link that brings everything together. I don't want to go around in circles over and over again, so I'll just say that Maki is probably one of the greatest written characters in the Persona series, and she's also probably the most Persona character to ever Persona. Now what about the main antagonist? Well, they're pretty great too, but since I don't want to spoil too much, I'll leave it there for now. So what about the Snow Queen route? What's so different about that? In this route, instead of going after SEBEC, the group investigates the urban legend aptly titled the Snow Queen, which leads to the town being frozen, leaving the group no choice but to infiltrate the dungeons spawned by the new Snow Queen in an attempt to save her and the town. Since you don't pursue SEBEC, you don't follow the storyline regarding Maki, but it's still a pretty solid route and has some interesting ideas. If I had to recommend you one of the two routes, I would definitely say the SEBEC route. But like I said, they're both important, so if you can, I would recommend doing both. But at the end of the day, it's up to you. The last thing I want to say about the story, which will lead me into the next section of this video, is that there are optional party members you can choose to use in the game, and they actually do all have their own character arcs as well. For example, in my SEBEC route, I chose to bring Ellie into my team, but you can choose others like Reiji, Ayase, Brown, and whoever else. They all have their own personality traits and arcana, and their arcana, while not representing something like a social link, is still important from a gameplay perspective, but I'll get there in a second. They may not play the biggest role in terms of driving the narrative forward, but damn, it's a really cool idea, and maybe we could see it come back in the future someday because it adds a lot of replay value. That's all I have to say regarding the story for now. It's genuinely great, and I think any Persona fan could enjoy it. But the second most important thing for a JRPG is the gameplay. So does this game still hold up today? Well, it heavily depends on one key factor. Are random encounters a make or break for you? If not, then yeah, it's pretty solid actually. If it is though, then I'm sad to say that there's probably no way you can enjoy this realistically. I'm not saying you shouldn't give it a chance, but there are a fuck ton of random encounters in this game. Seriously, I'm not gonna make a montage or whatever, but there have been times where I enter a dungeon for the first time and just try to soak in the music and atmosphere. And then I take a single step, then bam. Maybe it's just me, but I feel like the random encounter rate in this game is abnormally high. But I don't want to be too negative because it's kind of just a PS1 JRPG thing. It is what it is. So let me go into what I actually like about the gameplay, because there is a lot of things I like about it. The best part about the gameplay by far for me is the formation system. Each skill in the game has a certain range it's good at, and depending on where you have your characters positioned will determine which attack they can use. For example, a physical attack is of course going to require you to be up close most of the time, but sometimes not. Some characters are more oriented to be positioned close or far away, and considering the fact you can change the formation in battles, it makes it pretty interesting. The other major thing about this game, and this ties into the formation system, is that you can equip almost any persona to any party member. It's not just the protagonist that can use multiple personas, but everyone, which also ties into the narrative as well. But since you can do this, you can make nearly any party member do whatever you want them to do. The only real restriction is regarding the character's arcana type, because depending on how the affinity is, they might not be able to use the persona as well as another party member, or maybe they just can't use it at all. Naoya, for example, is the Emperor Arcana, so he can use personas of that arcana better than anyone else, and that's the case for everyone else as well. Also, it's important to note that the protagonists were not the full arcana up until Persona 3, which gives them more of an identity, at least in my eyes. Honestly, Naoya might be the drippiest protagonist in terms of his design and demeanor, but that's a whole other topic. There isn't too much I want to say regarding the formations and all that because it's pretty straightforward. And like I said, it more or less lets you do whatever you want to do as long as you're willing to do a decent amount of fusing. But unfortunately, this leads me into the worst thing about the entire game by far, which are the negotiations. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I think the negotiation system in this game is absolutely fucking awful, because no matter how hard you try, sometimes the demons simply refuse to do anything you want them to do. Each party member has 4 negotiation options they can use, and you're meant to use the traits of the demon to figure out what would work best. If a demon is gloomy or something like that, for example, you could use Horrify with Ellie to make them scared. This sounds like a great concept, and that's because it is, but the problems arise once you start finding demons that have upwards of 3 to 4 traits, because I cannot for the life of me figure out what the fuck you're supposed to choose for some of these demons. There was a point in the early game where I was trying to get an ogre's skill card, and I genuinely couldn't do it. I even resorted to using save states on the emulator just to try and see what I was supposed to do. And even after banging my head against the wall for several minutes, it felt like the eagerness meter just wouldn't go up, which is what you need for the skill cards. It took like 10 to 15 minutes of straight pure trial and error and a single encounter to get the skill card. I'm not sure if this is a skill issue or what, but everyone I asked that has played the game as well tells me the negotiation system is ass, so I can't be tripping that much. Once you were able to get the skill cards, it's just like fusing any other persona though. So in that regard, it's perfectly fine. I have no complaints. But yeah, the negotiations are ass. I stand by that fully. The only other major qualm I have with the gameplay is the way you earn XP. In this game, the way you're awarded XP is how much you contributed to the fight. What does this mean, you might ask? Let me explain. XP is awarded on a character-by-character basis depending on factors such as how much damage you dealt, how much you healed and supported, and things along those lines. But the problem is that this makes it really annoying to keep everyone at an equal playing field. Naturally, for most of the game, I had my best personas on the protagonist. So since he was dealing the majority of the damage, the other characters ended up falling behind significantly in level. The only character that didn't fall behind was Maki, and that's because she was my dedicated healer for the entire game. And I'm not 100% sure if this is true, but it seems like healing is by far the fastest way to level up. Near the end of the game when I was grinding up for the final boss battle, she ended up passing Nalia in level by a pretty sizable degree, and all I set her to do was heal. So hey, if you find yourself struggling like me, put healing skill cards onto your party members, it might help. Also, I want to talk about the late game a tiny bit because this was just hilarious to me, to be honest. So the entire game, I used personas with stuff like Megiddo skills because that's how I was dealing the most damage, right? Well, I pull up to the final boss, and the final phase absorbs Megiddo skills. So since I didn't have anything else that did as much damage, I had to go back and grind up some levels. This was, I think, the one and only time in a Persona game ever where I felt like I was completely cooked in a boss battle, which was kind of humbling actually. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that the game is hard or anything like that. I mean, even the final boss ones I had prepared did actually 0 damage the entire fight, but it does challenge you more than you might think at times. Certain random encounters, if you're not prepared, can and will fuck you up. And since the random encounter rate is high as hell, this basically means that you could be at risk of getting cooked at any time. So make absolute sure you save regularly and at least try to get a variety of different personas for your party members. I've talked about the major things I want to touch on, so let me go over some other smaller-ish things. Each character has a weapon and gun they can use, and yes, they are actually real guns this time. There are different ammo types that do different things, there's armor, and all the things that you would expect from most JRPGs. Even though the gameplay is a little dated in my opinion, there is some enjoyment to be had, and it's honestly not that bad, which is very ironic for me to say because as I was playing it, I found myself hating it, so maybe I have Stockholm Syndrome, I don't know. There's one other thing I forgot to talk about with the gameplay, and it's the money system. Again, I'm not sure if I'm just tripping, but it felt like there was nothing ever important to spend money on. By the end of the game, after getting everyone's ultimate personas and all that, I had damn near like 7 million yen if I remember correctly, and besides some items to leave the dungeons or fend off weak enemies, I didn't buy shit. Again, this could just be me because I'm not the most knowledgeable about Persona 1 yet, so hey, keep that in mind. The next section I want to talk about goes into the gameplay as well, but it's significant enough to be a smaller section of its own, and that is the dungeon design. Atmospherically, I think all of the dungeons are pretty great. They are all distinct from each other, and you'll always see something different from one dungeon to the next. Most dungeons have a certain gimmick to them as well. For example, the Lost Forest dungeon of the game will have tiles that turn your character in a different direction, so you have to navigate around it. It's not hard to traverse around these gimmicks, but they're a neat little addition that makes it a little more than simply going from point A to point B. The SEBEC building, which is one of the earliest dungeons, was pretty interesting because there are about 5 floors to it, but to get to the main area you need to get to, you have to take this long ass, somewhat convoluted path to get there, and it was actually a pretty memorable dungeon to me, all things considered. I had a pretty good time there actually. There are about 17-ish dungeons give or take in total across both routes, 13 being in the SEBEC route and 4 being in the Snow Queen route if I remember correctly. There are some dungeons that get reused, but narratively it works. The layout is changed up, and the demons inside are different, so it isn't too bad in my opinion. Overall, I think the dungeons are good surprisingly, which is funny I say that because as I was playing it, I just hated it. I really hated playing it, I'm gonna be honest. But after I beat it, I could gain appreciation for it, which I don't know why, but like, as I was playing this game, I just hated it. Like, I really hated it. But now that I'm making this review, I'm realizing I really didn't mind it that much, which is kind of funny. Anyway, the final point I will go over for this video is the music. Let's be honest here, at this point we all know how good Persona and Megaten's music selection is, and this game is obviously no exception. Regardless of whether you're playing the PSP remake or the original PS1 version, they're both fantastic. And what I like about the two of them is that they approach things differently. The PS1 version goes for that more moody, grungy, dark tone that does fit the game well,
but the PSP version still fits pretty well in my opinion. But it was a bit more of the modern Persona style, kinda similar to Persona 4's music, which makes sense as they came out very close to each other. I played my initial playthrough with the PSP Remake's OST, but I plan on playing it with the PS1 OST at some point if I ever replay the game. The PSP version has bangers like School Days, whereas the PS1 theme has a better main battle theme to me personally. Again, I think they're both great and they have their moments, so regardless of what you listen to or prefer, you'll be cooking. So I won't waste time talking your ear off because we know how good Persona's music is. So we've gone over the story, gameplay, dungeons, and music. Now all that's left is to answer the final major question of this entire video. Is Persona 1 still worth playing today? Again, I do think it depends on a couple of things. Those being how much you enjoy the Persona series, or just older JRPGs in general, and also if random encounters are something you're okay with. If you're okay with it, then yeah, I do actually think the game was worth giving a shot and playing. For all the things that frustrated me or that I hated, I don't regret playing it at all. If you're not in the demographic I mentioned though, then I'd say to still maybe give it a chance, but I wouldn't bank on it being something you'll love or anything like that. It's just the nature of older titles. If nothing else, I think the story is something worth experiencing for sure. So hey, maybe you can live the meme of watching the game on YouTube. For Persona 1, I don't think it's the worst option ever, but hey, at the end of the day, it's up to you of course. Be your true self and choose your destiny on whether to don this game's mask or not. And with that really corny one-liner out of the way, that's going to be it for this video. How do you feel about Persona 1? Have you ever played it? Are you at all interested? If you're one of the people that kind of dig what the game is going for but don't want to play it yourself, then all I'm gonna say is that you should like and subscribe and turn the post notifications on because I've got some things planned. That's all I gotta say though. It's been your boy Yanari Gogeta, and I will see you in the next video. Peace out and have a great day.